now let's talk about, kind of segueing from the introduction clip, let's talk about the differences between front headlock and turtle when you're talking about wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. Okay, first of all, the scoring criteria is completely different. So in wrestling, something that scores may not score in jiu-jitsu and vice versa. In wrestling, you're trying to expose your partner's back to the floor, and in jiu-jitsu, you're trying to expose your partner's back to yourself. So, for example, if someone goes behind me and gets a turtle position, me bellying out and going down to my stomach would not be a good thing for me to do because my partner could just take my back and strangle me. Whereas in wrestling, that's not what the goal is. The main difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling when you're talking about front headlock and turtle attacks is a threat of submissions. Okay, if I have sitting down in a front headlock, for example, okay, if at no point she has hands on my hands, I can always come through and I can start feeding guillotines into place. I can start coming through and I can start feeding strangles into place, katagatames into place, various kinds of strangles from here. So my partner's first thing from a turtle or from a front headlock position is always to address my hand position. And if she doesn't, she's going to get strangled most of the time. Okay? Whereas in wrestling, your partner doesn't have to have a primary defensive hand because there's no threat of actually getting strangled and the match being ended from here. Okay? So you'll see things in jiu-jitsu that you don't normally see in wrestling. Where from here, instead of sprawling, being in a situation like so, where my partner can't access my legs, I actually come in some cases and I bait my leg and I give my partner my leg like so. So that now from here, we can go through, we can bait the leg so that her defensive hands come off of my hand, and as she goes to grab my leg, she exposes the neck, and now I can go in and sit the guillotines. Where in wrestling, you almost never see a situation where your partner baits the leg, where now she can start going into her attacks. But in jiu-jitsu, I don't always have to keep my legs back and away from my partner because of the fact that if she does, right now she has defensive hands in place. If I bring my leg towards my partner and she goes to lock on, now from here, we can start going in and we can start passing and feeding hands into place and going in for strangles and whatnot. Okay, so there's dangers of submissions when you're working in jiu-jitsu. One of the main differences that we look at from turtle position is that my partner from here, when you're talking about a jiu-jitsu context, is mostly looking to roll into a bottom guard position. Okay, so she'll roll over the near shoulder, for example, and she'll put me back into a guard. Okay, in wrestling, obviously, you can't do this because you can't expose your partner's back to the floor, or you can't expose your back to the floor in wrestling because you get pinned, you give up points. Okay, so in jiu-jitsu, she's obviously looking first to defend the submission. If I can just bring my hands across and lock a submission, I'm going to submit my partner. So again, she has to have defensive hands in place, and she has the ability to start shoulder rolling either over the near shoulder or the far shoulder and putting me back into some kind of guard position, which doesn't exist in wrestling. In a wrestling type scenario, my partner is looking to either one, belly out, which doesn't make any sense for us because now I just step over and I can start strangling my partner. Or more applicably, looking to separate hands, stand up, and looking to get away from me, which makes sense. Okay? The issue is that some things that are applicable in wrestling defensively don't work for jiu-jitsu, and some things that work in jiu-jitsu aren't applicable for wrestling. So the goal for the job that we have is to figure out what things we can use effectively from classical jiu-jitsu, and what things that we can take from wrestling and use them and modify them if we have to use in jiu-jitsu to get up and get away or to reverse our partner. Okay, so some major differences between wrestling and jiu-jitsu from both front headlock and from turtle position. Number one, obviously, the threat of submission. You can't just have your hands out on the floor or be reaching for your partner's legs if your neck's getting attacked and you're getting strangled. You can't leave your arms out for your arms to get attacked. You can't let your partner lock kimuras, things like that. So the threat of submission is obviously the biggest one. Number two is there's a drastic difference in how points are scored and matches are finished in wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. Some things that work in wrestling won't work in jiu-jitsu, and some things that work in jiu-jitsu obviously won't work in wrestling. So our job is to take a classical jiu-jitsu approach, combined with a classical wrestling approach and modify moves that can work from wrestling and use them and integrate them into our jiu-jitsu to become an effective submission grappler. Okay, you always hear jiu-jitsu guys, old school jiu-jitsu guys preaching just jiu-jitsu. Just jiu-jitsu isn't all there is. Okay, and you hear wrestlers saying that, jiu-jitsu guys are pussies or whatever the case is. That would never work. They have to understand they're two different sports, and you can take elements from each sport and be very effective. You can be very effective combining the two sports together, and that's what we're looking to do. So we're going to be looking at classical jiu-jitsu combined with your typical wrestling approach. We're going to be looking at both standing and rolling escapes to put our partner back in guard, or to get up and reshoot in a partner. So it's going to be a good combination of the two.